Hello. Okay, we'll give this a minute. Hi, Jack. Okay, we've just gotten started, so we'll give this another minute. Look at all these waves. Hello, everyone. We have an exciting topic today. Okay, so now I need to learn how to be able to add someone. We are going to be joined by the fabulous Dr. Alan Greene. Okay, one moment. Here we go. Wait for Alan to join us before I give you guys a formal intro. There he is!
Laura, hi, it worked. Here we are.
It did. You're still loading slightly on this end. There you go. Hi.
Hi, great to see you.
You too. And we used to see each other in person a lot more, but obviously the last year has held us back. So good to see you.
And so good to see you. Hopefully we'll see each other in person again soon.
I know. Okay, so let me formally intro you. This is terribly exciting to have you here. We have everyone joining us now. So I may intro you 2 or 3 times, but you really don't need much of an introduction. The fabulous Dr. Alan Greene, who is both a mentor and inspiration for me in so many ways. When I became a mom, your book was everything. No, seriously, Feeding Baby Greene. I know we're going to be talking about that slightly today as well. But you were also really the founder of what it means to be able to feed your baby healthy food and what that means. And I also have the pleasure of being able to sit on a fabulous organization aboard with you, Eat Real.
Yes.
And actually I'll pass it to you to give a little bit of more of a formal introduction, both on yourself and Eat Real, because I definitely want to give them a shout out.
Well, Eat Real is a wonderful organization that is aimed at getting kids in school to get real healthy food, both as part of their education and as part of building bodies to last for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And the reason we're on the board of that is because there's very little more important to kids' short-term and long-term health than what they eat, and making it really quality. In many ways, the school system is the biggest restaurant in the U.S., and we want to make it a great restaurant.
That is insane. The school system is the biggest fast food restaurant in this country. I mean, and here, we're going to be talking about early nutrition, and the fact that early nutrition is the start of an infant, and you put all of this work in to developing a healthy baby. As they get into the school system, that should continue, but there's a lot of work there.
But starting right is so important. Well, I started working just in the school system, but then when I looked at the childhood obesity epidemic, I saw that by 9 months old, about 30% of Americans are already overweight, and not just a healthy chubby, but have too many fat cells and an altered insulin metabolism. So we have to look at what's happening before 9 months to really get things going right, and then continue that in school.
Wow. Okay, we definitely need to do a separate live just on that in the future, and we need to pull in Nora.
Yes,
today we are going to be talking about sugar. And it's so funny because we're talking about sugar, and another close friend of ours, Dr. Robert Lustig, who is also the founder and author of all things sugar. I hope we do him justice by talking about it today. So, okay, I'm going to kick it off. This is in relation to early infant nutrition and very specifically formula.
Yes.
So I'm going to start, and actually I would love to get your thoughts on this. There's often a misconception that sugar isn't needed. And really, it needs to mimic breast milk. And a lot of sugar is found in breast milk. So can you first start by sharing a little bit of like, what is the makeup within breast milk and why is sugar needed?
A really great question. So first of all, Dr. Lustig is absolutely right that added sugar is one of the biggest problems in the American diet. And added sugars can really mess with our metabolism. But the sugars that are naturally found in foods can be also really beneficial. And one of the places they're found is in breast milk. Breast milk is a really complex formulation with lots of little ingredients, but there's three big macronutrients in there. There's fats, there's proteins, and there are carbohydrates. And most people don't think about it, but the carbohydrates make up more than fats and proteins combined. And among the carbohydrates, the number one ingredient is a very special type of sugar in breast milk. So it's there and it's good for us. It's not an added sugar, but a sugar that's really foundational, and it makes sense. You want a vulnerable, developing baby to have a really easy to digest energy source for the very major tasks of being an infant. Day to day, their brain connections are forming so quickly, which is a major source of energy use, and they need that sugar for that. In addition to that, they are putting on weight like never again in life. You know, they double in size in the first 5 months or so, they triple in size in the first year. And in order to do that, they need the sugar source to accomplish that. But again, it's a very special kind of sugar that also regulates how much they eat. They're exquisitely sensitive to sweetness. And if it's just the right amount of sweetness, they'll get just the right amount of calories they take in, and they'll end up perfectly growing this massive amount, but not too much and not too little.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Okay, so let's actually talk about the specifics then of these types of sugars.
Yes.
This is where, you know, people say, oh, you know, if you don't have corn syrup, you don't have sugar. That's a misconception. There is a spectrum of different sugars that could possibly be used in infant formula, and a spectrum of sugars that are used in all different types of food. So I'm gonna throw it to maybe one of the most controversial ones that we often hear about, which is corn syrup. So I'll start by saying, why is corn syrup? Do you think corn syrup should be used in infant formula? And is there better sugars that we could be using?
Really great question. So as a pediatrician, it actually shocks and saddens me that corn syrup is so common in infant formula in the US. Many, many babies are raised on corn syrup as the primary ingredient of their formula. And on the one hand, I'm not shocked. It's cheaper, and so that we're often driven by economics. But the very special sugar that's in breast milk is something called lactose. And it is different than any other sugar. You know, we talked about how breast milk is really complex. It's also variable. The breast milk changes even during a single feeding, and the sweetness level will change during a single feeding, over the hours, over the days, over the weeks, over the months. Is very variable. And breast milk changes depending where somebody's born. If you're living in an area where there's a lot of seafood, then the fatty acid profile is different than if you're living in an area where there's not a lot of seafood. There's so many things that change. But with all of the changes over time and over culture and over ethnicity and over geography, there is one thing constant in breast milk. And that constant thing is that the number one ingredient, whether the mom is a vegetarian or a vegan who gets no lactose in her diet, the number one ingredient is lactose. And it's important to understand that. Yeah, it's important to understand that. So why would, and it's not like immediately obvious it would be that way. It's not, backing up before that, and it's not just every mom, every culture for all of human history that we know about. It's every mammal. So if you see a dolphin, it's lactose. Yeah. If you see a lion or a gazelle or an elephant, it's lactose that's there to feed the infant. And it's not immediately obvious that it would be that way, because a dolphin's not like getting a lot of milk and cheese in the ocean, there's not lactose lying around in the blood for that to go into the breast milk. There's a lot of things we eat that go into breast milk, but the lactose, no matter what species of mammal, no matter where the woman is on the earth, whether she's a vegan and gets zero lactose or not, one of the magical things about the mammary glands is that they create lactose. They take the regular blood sugar that's going around, glucose that's going around the blood, and from that, they transform it into something called galactose, a very special milk sugar. And from that, they forge lactose, and that's what's given to the baby. And then on the other end, babies, and again, this is human babies or a cute little kitten or a cute little puppy or a tiger cub or whatever it is, the babies in their intestine, the intestinal villi, these little fingers reaching out for food, they secrete this special enzyme called lactase that's waiting for the lactose. It's just there for the lactose. And so it's this lock and key. It's what mom's making is exactly what the baby needs. It's this intimate dance. And to fly in the face of biology, to fly in the face of nature, to fly in the face of history and replace it with processed corn syrup? What a crazy idea.
So good. It's so true. It's so true. Like when you start to break it down too, one of the things that blew my mind was almost 50% of the infant formulas on the market here in the US still use corn syrup as their primary carb.
Yeah, it's such a crazy idea. And there's three ways that corn syrup is really different than lactose that I wanted to share with you. One of them is something called the glycemic index. And that's a measure of when you eat something, how much of a blood sugar spike you get with it, how much you release insulin as related to it. And I've been involved with trying to get white rice cereal not being the first food for babies because it's a high glycemic index, causes insulin spikes. Corn syrup too. It's like a glycemic index of 100. Lactose is less than half of that. It's like 45. It's like an entirely different metabolic thing. Second thing
Alan,
is
for folks to understand, that means the level of sweetness.
Well, it's a little bit different. So that's the level of how it affects your blood sugar, the spikes and dips, and how it affects your insulin level. And that's one way that it's really different. The second way, though, you're exactly right. The level of sweetness is different. That's measured on a different scale. And their corn syrup is a 1, which is like ultimately sweet. And the lactose is like a 0.2 or a 0.4. It's much less sweet. And so it does a few things if it's too sweet. One is babies eat more calories the sweeter it is, so it makes them eat more. And then secondly, it trains them. All of our taste preferences for carbohydrates are formed by experience, and this gives them a sweet tooth where they're hungry for processed white flour and for sweets, and it just really reinforces that. So again, making it metabolically bad, making it bad in terms of the sweetness. And then the other thing that I've only been thinking about for the last maybe 10 years or so, a little longer than that now. I used to think we are what we eat, that everything you see when you look at a baby comes from the food that they got. And that's sort of true, but it's not. It's leaving out a really important piece. And that is we are what we eat, plus all the things that our microbiome creates. The bacteria living in our gut create nutrients and neurotransmitters and things that help our mood and things that help our immune system. And those grow from what we eat. The foods that we eat select the organisms that are there, the diversity that's there. And one of the really important groups are the lactobacilli. And the lactobacilli, they eat several things, but one of the things they eat is lactose. And it's actually, those bacteria are even in breast milk, and they're in yogurt, and they're in the probiotics people often take. That's right. And that all of those are nurtured by lactose, and corn syrup does different organisms, and it sets up a different microbiome.
Okay, so let's talk about another common misconception too. You said the word lactose a lot, and for a lot of people who aren't even aware that lactose is even a sugar, there's this misconception that, I mean, it is on the rise. You're seeing more and more people personally diagnose themselves as being lactose intolerant. Yes. So let's just talk about infants for a second. How does one determine if their child might be lactose intolerant? And is it common?
Great question. And the answer is because it is the number one food that humans and mammals digest for infancy. True lactose intolerance is incredibly rare in babies. It's pretty common in adults. Throughout history, there's some cultures that have started drinking milk of sheep and goats and cows and other animals. And in those cultures, it selected for a gene that keeps lifelong lactase to make it, you be able to do it. But most places in the world, most adults are lactose intolerant. They quit making the lactase, the thing that's that lock-in key. And even in the West, where the lifelong lactase is kind of common, about a third of adults are still lactose intolerant, and that's going up over time. And so most people know somebody at least that's lactose intolerant if they're not themselves. But babies, extremely rare.
Yeah. So just because a mom might be lactose intolerant themselves, that does not necessarily mean that their 2-month-old baby is as well.
Absolutely not. There is no correlation between normal adult lactose intolerance. You outgrow that need for wanting to grow 2 or 3 times in a year, and your body adjusts separately, unless it became a staple of your culture. That's normal and has nothing to do with whether a baby is lactose intolerant, which again is extremely rare.
Yeah, I think when I saw the percentages on this, it's less than 2% of babies who would have some form of lactose intolerance to their formula. And in which case, they do need to find a formula that doesn't have lactose in it.
That's right. And that does happen sometimes. And that's something to talk with your pediatrician about. There's a stool test that can help steer you in the right direction on that. But for the great majority of healthy babies, that's a misconception that sadly, to me, it seems like marketers have preyed upon cynically, because they know babies go through a gassy period as their microbiome's developing, and a fussy period. There's a peak age of crying around 6 weeks old in most kids. Parents are sleep deprived. You just want some kind of relief. And somebody says, we've got this sensitive formula for you that doesn't have lactose in it, and so your baby's going to be better. And the parents think, oh yeah, dad is lactose, or I'm lactose intolerant, somebody is, and maybe that'll help. And then it's loaded with sugar that tastes great, so they light up when they get it right away because it's super sweet. And it almost acts like a drug to make them a little bit zoned out. And so to me, it's really a cynical thing to market that to unsuspecting parents and babies who deserve better.
And as a mom, you're tired, you're vulnerable. If your baby's crying, you are going to do anything for them.
Right.
So yeah, if you see sensitive, obviously you want your baby to be able to tolerate it. One of the other things that I've also come to realize in this too is, like, besides lactose maybe intolerance, there's also just babies who maybe can't digest certain proteins, which are two totally different things.
Totally different things. And that's more common. That may be maybe 3% or even 7% of kids will have a intolerance to a protein like cow's milk protein or soy protein. And that's an actual allergy. Thankfully, most of them will outgrow it, often by the first birthday, but that's a completely different thing. And that you would use a different protein source, but it doesn't mean that you need to skip the lactose.
Yeah. Okay, so to recap for many of those who join, less than 2% of babies are actually lactose intolerant. Less than 10% actually have like some protein, deficiency in being able to consume cow's milk protein. But looking for a formula out there, you essentially want to be finding one that uses lactose as the carb source, and ideally a protein ratio where there's a higher weight to casein, allowing a baby to be able to consume it easy.
Yep, that's exactly right. I do a review for physicians every year about how to select formulas. Amazing. And which is where I first became aware of Bobby, by the way, was in doing that review. I tell people, of the current formulas on the market, the first thing that you want to do is choose an organic formula that has lactose as the sugar for a healthy baby. And that, obviously Bobby is so great, being a European
Yeah.
style recipe with FDA standards, and fabulous. So thankful for what you've done there.
Well, thank you for spreading the word. Please keep going. Okay, I have a totally random question. Do you ever recommend to your patients to try their breast milk or to try their formula to understand the sweetness?
I do,
You
actually.
do?
And I think it's a great thing to try. Some of the formulas you can taste. The New York
Yeah.
Times did an article where they taste tested, and some of them
Yeah.
tasted like grape juice because they were so sweet. I think it's a great thing to do.
Okay, great. We need to do a happy hour someday. Bring
There
it
we
on.
go.
Okay, I'm going to see any questions from anyone on here with the fabulous Dr. Alan Greene. I did have one question that came in yesterday
Yes.
in relation to preemies.
Mm-hmm.
So when your baby is born prematurely, should they be thinking about a formula differently, looking for different nutrient levels, or even be thinking about sugars differently?
Wonderful question. The babies typically are born around 40 weeks gestation, give or take a week or two. And for the ones born before 37 weeks, and especially the ones born before at 34 weeks or before, they do have pretty different nutritional needs. Often breast milk will come in fairly early, and it is a great thing to still feed. And you can add in something called human milk fortifier that adds in the extra nutrients that the very early premature babies need. But there are also formulas that are formulated for that situation. So any baby before 34 weeks or so, and some even before 37 weeks or so, depending how they're doing, I would work with a pediatrician or work with a neonatologist to get the best formula for their level of development. But then somewhere around 35, 36, 37 weeks, they begin to transition to where a regular formula might be fine.
Very good. Okay, another question here. When you start to introduce foods
Yes.
in and around kind of that between 4 to 6 months, depending on when your child is ready, should anyone be thinking about formula differently? Like all of a sudden, is food more important than their formula or breast milk they're getting? How do you think about the hierarchy, and should they be thinking about it differently?
So there's a couple things that are going on during that time period. One is you want to fuel the growth that we talked about. And for that, they're going to get most of their nutrients from what they drink still. They'll get it from formula, from breast milk, and that's great. But another big task that's going on, we talked about before, is nurturing the microbiome. And beyond that, that's when taste preferences for the long haul become really established.
Yeah.
It starts during pregnancy and continues after that. But during that time of solid foods, when a baby gets something, on average, 6 to 10 times, about 85% likely to form a lasting preference for it that'll last at least until the next stage. And without getting exposed to that, then they're not likely to. Once babies start to walk, they get physically afraid of new flavors, new textures, new sources of food, which makes sense. You wouldn't want a toddler to walk away from parents and pick a berry and eat it. It could be bad for them, or a leaf might be poison. So they have a fight or flight response to new flavors. So you want, between when they start solids and they start walking, to expose them to as many flavors of great food as you can. So breast milk tends to have lots of flavors in it. And so for those kids, the solids, I think, are a little less important.
Yeah.
And I would tend to nurse first and let them have as much solids as they want afterwards. For formula-fed kids, as long as they're getting plenty of formula a day, then I would probably start with solids to get them to try a bunch of different flavors early on, and then tank them up with formula to fill them up.
Oh, why didn't we talk like 6 months ago and my own little one was there? This is so good. And just even like thinking about the whole until they walk, like such a great milestone to have in mind. Okay, I see another question here. How about infants treated with antibiotics? Are they compromised at all? Should you be thinking again about their milk or their food differently if there's antibiotics introduced?
So there have been some studies looking at giving regular lactose or giving a substitute formula during the time after antibiotics or after diarrheal illness. And they have found that the loose stools stop a little bit sooner if you switch to lactose-free, but you end up with better arc of weight gain, and after the end of recovering from antibiotics, better, quicker if you stick with the lactose. So I would stick with that. But the one thing that I would suggest, we know that in general, food allergies develop when whole proteins slip into the blood. And it's good for most kids to get exposed to a wide variety of foods and not worry much about allergies. But when somebody's on antibiotics and the gut is a bit inflamed and a bit, for want of a better word, leakier at that time, that's when I would avoid all of the allergenic foods that you might be concerned about, peanuts or fish or things like that.
Yeah, that's really good to know. I mean, allergens and understanding how to introduce allergens early on has become a big topic as well.
Yes.
Okay, one last question. The difference between skim milk versus whole milk. Most infant formulas today are skim milk. Pretty much all infant formulas on the market. How do you think about the transition when your baby is one, going from a formula that is using skim milk and then giving them whole milk? Is it a harsh transition? Should we all stop worrying and just immediately switch them? What advice do you have? Because it seems to be a very common question. Like, is one really the right age? And parents often fear going from kind of an immediate switch from formula to whole milk.
That's a really good question. So the reason that formulas tend to use skim milk is that baby cows with their nutrition are solving a different problem than baby humans. Cows are trying to go from tiny to 1,000 or 2,000 pounds, and we're trying to go from tiny to 100, maybe 200 pounds. We don't want to grow as fast as cows do. And cows tend to have more fat and different fats than human milk does. So to try to approximate breast milk, the easiest way to do it is take a skim milk and then add back in the amount and types of fats that would make it closest to human milk. So that's why formulas tend to choose skim milk. Once that you are switching over, typically in the second year or so, whole fat milk I do like. They tend to gain weight at a better pace. The fats tend to be good fats for them. If it's an organic milk, tend to be better fats for them. And the skim milk, where the fat's taken all the way out and not replaced, is something where that makes you gain weight even faster because it makes the sugar content relatively higher. So I think it's a better balance. If you can, some babies will do fine doing it just quickly and don't even think about it and have no switch. Others with a little more sensitive stomach will have different stools for a couple of weeks. And if you find that, you can slow down a little bit, but it's not a big deal. The gut bacteria will adjust and you can move forward from there.
And that is a beautiful summary, because at the end of the day, you just need peace of mind. You're going to be okay. Try it. If it doesn't work, switch back. Your baby will be great and you will be great.
Yep.
And I love just even the way that you're giving this advice. It's already making me feel calmer about my decisions. So for anyone else watching, if you continue to have questions, the fabulous founder, author, physician, Dr. Alan Greene, you can go to DrGreene.com.
It's DrGreene.com, DrGreene.com. Or you can find me also at Bambini Fortuna, a bunch of remedies for babies that we put together.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are fabulous. I've really, really appreciated this conversation. And not all sugars are created equal. I think that's the major takeaway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Laura, so great being with you. Thank you for what you're doing and look forward to connecting again soon.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, now I need to actually learn how to stop this. Okay.